Hello there. What does Clydeside, Burnley and Pendle, East Yorkshire, United Counties, Southend Transport and Southampton Citybus all have in common? Well, apart from all being bus companies, and potentially bus companies that no longer exist, they all operated former London Transport Routemasters in the post-deregulation busscape. But why would all these companies buy defunct former London Transport buses, which at that point were around the 35-year-old mark? Well, take a return journey with me on our YouTube time machine, and I will give you the answers. When you look at Routemasters today lined up on a rally field, it's hard to believe that once they were just looked at as old buses. In fact, you don't have to just be on a rally field, because pretty much everywhere and anywhere these things are regarded as icons, and when they're sold they command an incredibly high price for a preserved bus. But as I said, before all that, and before they became fashion accessories, they were just literally old buses. London Transport had a huge fleet of them. There were 2,123 of the standard 27.5 foot long Routemaster. And then there was the RML Routemaster, and these came in at just slightly under 30 foot long, and there were 524 of these things built, many of which London Transport had brought back from London Country in the 1970s. Now, of course, the problem with the Routemaster is that it's a crew-operated bus, and it takes two people to operate it. In the 1970s, though, crew-operated buses were very much on the way out. One-man operation was the way forwards. The accountants were just starting to take over the industry at this point, and they liked one-man operated buses. Why waste money having two people doing the job that one man can do? So, of course, every bus operator in the country started to invest in one-man operated buses, and London Transport was no exception to this, buying a huge fleet of Daimler and later Leyland fleet lines, which would become the DMSs. Now, it's fair to say that these probably weren't the most successful bus that London Transport operated, which is rather strange because cities like Birmingham and even Hong Kong operated fleet lines under just as arduous conditions. But London Transport wasn't keen. It was adamant that the Routemaster fitted into its maintenance schedules an awful lot better than the DMS did. The one-man operated double-decker buses were less reliable, and of course they were a lot slower in service, because despite the best will in the world, the driver can't physically load the bus, take the fares and drive it all at the same time. You have to load the bus up, take the fares, close the doors and then pull away. Thus the dwell times at bus stops were a lot longer on one-man operated vehicles than it was on the crew operated vehicles. Now, to be fair, when the DMSs arrived, London Transport did still have quite a stock of the earlier RT buses, which was the predecessor of the Routemaster. And on an age basis, of course, these tended to get withdrawn first. Now, of course, the DMS fleet line would not be the only one-man operated double-decker bus that London Transport was operating. In the mid-1970s came the B15, which would morph into the Leyland Titan. And a few years later, the Metro bus arrived in the London Transport fleet. And both of these types would build up quite large fleets within London Transport, and could be regarded as very reliable vehicles. Well, at least by London Transport, anyway. These more successful one-man operated buses would start to see the withdrawals of some of the Routemaster fleet. And during the 1980s, whilst the Routemaster was certainly still the king of central London, the suburbs and the areas surrounding central London tended to lose their Routemaster allocation and gain some rather nifty one-man operated double-decker buses. Now, as I said earlier on, at this point Routemasters were just old buses, and some were stripped for spare parts and dispatched to the Yorkshire Breakers, whilst some went to the Yorkshire Breakers and were stripped for spare parts there, with the parts being sent back to London Transport. However, the sales department of London Transport did actually sell Routemaster buses, and there's an interesting video on here where Mr. Sulu from Star Trek takes a wander around the yard of the sales department. Now, if that sounds like pure science fiction, I will try and find the video and put a link in the description of this video for you to watch. Outside of London, though, in the mid-1980s, there would be a big event in the bus industry that would affect the majority of bus operators. And it's something as well that would affect London eventually, and this was the deregulation and privatisation of the bus industry. Suddenly, everybody and anybody could operate a bus service. And many of these established operators, who for many years had been operating services on their own, suddenly found they had a coach company or a local bus company nipping at their heels. And it certainly wasn't just the local little companies that got involved in competition. The big companies fought against each other as well. Now, deregulation is something that crops up quite a lot on this channel, and I'm not going to go all political and give you my opinion on it, but I think my regular viewers will know what I think about it anyway. But it was a time of huge upheaval in the bus industry, and everybody and everything within companies now had to be held in account, and of course had to be financially viable. And this would probably be the point where accountants really started running the industry, rather than managers who'd worked their way up from, say, being a cleaner or being a bus conductor. Now, these bus managers knew how the industry worked and knew how to work the industry. But accountants didn't care about that sort of thing. They just saw red figures or black figures. A company either made a profit or a loss. What they needed was a gimmick that would get as many bums on seats as they could possibly get. Something that was quite nimble and fast and didn't have a long dwell time at bus stops. Whilst many operators went for minibuses, some looked at a much more traditional option. As I said previously in the video, the problem with one-man operated buses is the dwell time at bus stops. Now, a crew-operated bus, such as a Routemaster, can get everybody on the bus, the conductor rings the bell, and the bus pulls away, and they can be very quick at bus stops. While the bus is moving, the conductor's walking up and down and collecting the fares. Now, I tried this in a one-man operated bus once and it didn't go very well. Apparently, it's not advisable for the driver to be upstairs collecting fares while the bus is in motion. Who knew? But this is where the Routemaster bus came in, because at that point, the London Transport sales department had quite a few in stock, and they were cheap. Here on high streets, the Routemaster could load up and take off while the competition was still sat at the bus stop issuing fares. The Scottish Bus Group was one of the first off the mark to realise the potential of the Routemaster outside of London. By January 1986, both Clydeside and Kelvin were building up fleets of former London Transport Routemasters to operate in the Glasgow area. Clydeside would go on to own 114 Routemasters, many of which were actually painted by London Transport at Aldenham Works. At the time, a third company, Strathspey Scottish, was also inspecting two of Clydeside's Routemasters on Perth city services, and they would also go on to buy their own. It was reported at the time that the Routemasters cost about £4,500 each to purchase and to prepare for service, and at the time the Scottish Bus Group anticipated to hold on to them for 5 years. And this proved to be fairly accurate, as most of them were withdrawn around 1990. Another company that was to operate Routemasters not only in Scotland but pretty much all over the country was Stagecoach. Stagecoach had had a bit of a fling with Bristol Low-Deckers, but also bought Routemasters as well. And indeed, the operation of the Routemasters would lead Stagecoach into rather hot water, when in March-April 1990, Magic Bus of Perth was warned about its vehicle maintenance by the Scottish Traffic Commissioner, Keith Waterworth. During a public inquiry, it was revealed that 36 immediate prohibitions had been imposed on vehicles based at Perth, Inverness and Glasgow since the formation of Magic Bus a few years previously. In fact, Stagecoach blamed the problems at Glasgow solely on the fault of the Routemasters, claiming they were ancient. The managing director of Magic Bus at the time, Neil Reynoldson, stated these Routemasters would soon be replaced by minibuses. Another operator of second-hand Routemasters was Burnley and Pendle. In April 1988, it was reported that the Battle of Buses in Burnley was reaching new heights, and Burnley and Pendle Transport had introduced 10 Routemasters on an additional service that ran directly in front of Tyra Tours of Trandon, their competition. The buses played on their London origins by being known as the EastEnders, and indeed they were carrying the names of some of the characters from the TV series. So you had buses like Wixie, as you can see in this picture, and Dirty Den. I wonder if there was a Lofty. That would be quite appropriate for a double-decker bus, wouldn't it? Blackpool Transport was another operator in the northwest who operated Routemasters. These were called the Beach Roamer service, and was probably some of the more smarter Routemasters that were in operation at the time. Cumberland bought a fleet of Routemasters for operation in the Carlisle area. Cumberland, of course, was a subsidiary of Stagecoach, and Stagecoach's love of old Routemasters was shown when its other subsidiaries, such as United Counties and East Midlands, also operated them. Some of these Stagecoach vehicles tended to be moved around the various subsidiaries as well, with some of the buses moving from United Counties to Stagecoach East Midlands, and then on to Stagecoach Scotland and Bluebird buses. The United Counties buses were branded as Routemasters and were painted in basically National Bus Company leaf green. However, they had some orangey red and orange and cream stripes applied in vinyl, and coupled to the name being in a yellowy cream colour, they always looked a little bit faded and a little bit scruffy. In fact, some of these vinyls did seem to fade quite dramatically, and what started off as quite a smart traditional livery kind of started to look rather dowdy and down at heel in the end. Another northwestern operator to operate Routemasters was Greater Manchester Buses, who put 10 Routemasters on a route from West Didsbury to central Manchester. Now at the time, G&B was fighting with 6 independent operators on this route alone. But the Manchester Routemasters would only last for a couple of years, as despite the conductor-operated buses being popular, problems getting spare parts led to too much downtime with the buses, and the company was considering fresh initiatives with conventional buses by May 1990. This route and the buses were branded as the Piccadilly line, again playing on the origins of the buses from London. Without a doubt, some of the smartest buses that were purchased from London Transport, and probably some of the most successful, were those that were operated by Southend Transport. They purchased Routemasters in 1988 and were running them until 1993. These buses featuring a very impressive and clean-looking livery of blue, white and red. Now those of you who read the publications of Buses magazine and Bus and Coach Preservation and things like that will know the name John Lidston, as he regularly writes articles and provides photographs for these magazines and publications. Well, an interesting fact that I never realised until I did this video was that John Lidston was the man who was responsible for this rather nifty livery that was on the Routemasters. The Routemasters would also receive local names as well, and the livery that they were painted in would later spread to the rest of the fleet. However, in June 1993, Southend Transport was sold to the British Bus Group, which was later taken over by Cowie and ended up as a Reaver. And if ever there's a fun sponge in the room, it's a Reaver, so that was the end of Routemaster operations. Another East Coast operator of former London Transport Routemasters was East Yorkshire. In 1989, the town of Scarborough was seeing an awful lot of competition on their town services, with companies such as Primrose Valley and Appleby's, all competing with Scarborough and District, the East Yorkshire subsidiary. Now, going back to 1988, East Yorkshire had reintroduced crew-operated double-deckers in Hull and had bought 7 Routemasters from London Transport. These were painted in the old East Yorkshire colours of dark blue and primrose with a white roof band. These worked a route called the Clipper that ran out to Long Hill and was a 10-minute frequency. It was 3 of these buses that passed to Scarborough and District. On the south coast, Southampton Citybus was getting an awful lot of stick from Solent Blue Line, running between the city centre and the Millbrook estate. Solent Blue Line, of course, was a subsidiary of Southern Vectors, the Isle of Wight bus and coach company. At the time, Solent Blue Line was running crew-operated Bristol VRs. So, of course, Southampton Citybus decided to do a similar thing, but a little bit more gimmicky. They bought a small fleet of AEC Routemasters and put them into service, along with the last rear platform AEC Regent that they'd had in service. Now, along with the Manchester Routemasters, these always seemed to be a little bit cheap looking, almost like they hadn't painted them, they'd just given them a bit of a polish and put new vinyls on them. Now, I'm sure that's not the case, but they would have looked a lot nicer in the traditional Southampton livery, wouldn't they? Now, interestingly, when Stagecoach bought Hampshire Bus in 1987, it was assumed that Routemasters would be coming to Southampton, but would be operated by Hampshire Bus. And indeed, some Routemasters did pass through the Hampshire Bus overhaul works at Barton Park in Eastleigh. All in all, Southampton acquired 12 Leyland engine Routemasters, although only 6 buses were required for the service 16 they operated. This crew operation started on the 29th of May 1987. By early 1988, Southampton took another 5 Routemasters into stock, but a few months later, the entire Routemaster fleet was withdrawn. Yet another of the more successful operators, and probably one of the long-lasting ones as well, was Reading Mainline. Now, if you'd like a video on Reading Mainline and its Routemaster operations, please comment down below because it's quite an interesting story. Reading Mainline was set up on the 23rd of July 1994, one of the last Routemaster operated companies to be set up. They ended up operating 45 Routemasters, which operated 8 routes around Reading. In 1998, they were taken over by London Transport, but Routemaster operation continued for another 2 years, with the last services being run on the 22nd of July 2000. Now, at this time, Transport for London were looking for Routemaster buses to buy back to put into service in London, and these would be refurbished and emerge as the Dartmasters. The Reading Mainline vehicles became the largest source of Routemasters for Transport for London. There were other operators around the country, and indeed even in London too. Companies such as Nostalgia Bus, Time Bus, London and Country, Capital Citybus, and indeed Kentish Bus as well. If you'd like to see a video on these buses, again please comment down below. Again, the Kentish Bus RML story is quite an interesting one. But I don't want to swamp you too much with Routemasters because, again, like a lot of things in bus preservation, they're things you either love or you hate, aren't they? And I am aware that there is a world of buses outside of London as well. Indeed, it's because of a lot of these operations in the post-deregulation era that many of the Routemasters that we see around today survive. I always think it would be quite interesting to see the comments of the designer of the Routemaster when he would see some of the liveries that these buses appeared in this post-deregulation era. Some were very clean and bright, like Southend, and I particularly like the Kelvin livery as well. I think that looked really nice, almost similar to the Solent Blue Line, isn't it? And then there were the slightly dowdy liveries that just emphasised that this was an old London bus, like the Manchester and Southampton ones. And just think, when the Routemaster was first introduced, many people said it was outdated, which I suppose it was in a way, but it's still interesting how it's outlasted many of its contemporaries. Well, I hope you enjoyed this look at these rather interesting Routemaster buses. If you did enjoy this video, please like and share it, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel so that you don't miss my future releases in this and my other series here on YouTube. Thanks once again for watching. Bye for now.